Welcome on in, Golf fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our DFS and betting live stream for round 2 of the Scottish Open. Of course, with them across the pond, a little bit of an earlier live stream, which is nice, gives people a little bit more time to digest all the content, and of course, gives us a chance to see some new people down there in live stream. So first off, wherever you guys are, say hi down there in the live chat when you get here. Let's go ahead and get after it out there for Friday's action. If you're new around here, let me give you an idea of what to expect over the next hour or so. First off, we're going to start with a look at course conditions, get an idea for the weather tomorrow, conditions, scoring average, all of that. And then afterwards, we're going to talk through DFS and the prop side of things and give you an idea of how to attack each of those slates. So by the end, you should have all the information that you need to go out there, make your decisions for DFS or for props or for whatever kind of exposure that you're getting to. So if you have any questions throughout the ordeal, whether it's going to be for DFS, any sort of exposure, just let me know down below. Even if it's just about the golf tournament in general or PGA DFS in my process, I'll answer all of those questions as well. So just let me know down below. And hey, round 1 was a really solid start for us this week. We ended up having a complete prop sweep out there for round 1. So whether it was the underdog slip we hit, both of those props ended up cashing. Prize picks, 2 of 2 over there with Aberg and Sanjay. And then our pick 6 props out there for round 1 also ended up being a 3 for 3 sweep. So whether you took the 2-man or the 3-man over there in pick 6, everything ended up cashing. So that was great. We've got Aberg in the top 5. We've got Thomas Dietrich in the top 5 for outrights. Far from done for this week, but certainly a great start. What's going on, Bart? So Bart hopping on by. He'll be part of the replay crew this time around. First off, welcome on in. We got Delbert in here for once. He says, yeah, it's kind of weird to be able to make it for once. Glad to have you. Cheers to you out there. Steven with the pick 6 leans. That's awesome. Yeah, the prize picks props were spot on today. We profited across both sites, so we'll take it. We got Nick in here for once. This is what I'm talking about, right? Earlier start time. We get a few new names popping in, or guys that we don't see all that often. So cheers to you. What's going on? MN Holla, Tommy, and who were the top 20 guys in Tee to Green? I'll show you that a little bit later. So definitely a lot of guys that we're going to be looking at in our player pool that were good Tee to Green, but I'll make sure to show you those guys here in a little bit. Before we hop into our analysis for round 2, just want to remind you guys of the sponsor and partner for this live stream, which of course are our friends over there at the Ship It Nation. They are your resource for all your needs for DFS, whether it's PGA DFS like we're talking about here, or a variety of different other sports that you're getting to for exposure. Right here on the channel, we focus on what we're good at. That would be golf and football, but I'm sure a lot of you out there have a lot of other sports that you're passionate about. Maybe it's the NBA, NHL, football when it comes down, you name it. Over there at the Ship It Nation, they have you covered with all of those sports, and they're not going to price gouge you for it. So it's a great one-stop shop to get all of that content, whether it's projections, whether it's DFS process-based content that they're posting over there in the Ship It Nation, player pool, all of the different analysis from their experts over there at the Ship It Nation. Just a great resource to have. So check them out if you guys haven't already. And yeah, let's go ahead, get the plug out of the way and hop on into the action here. So first off, let's take a look at the scoring averages from round 1 and get an idea for how the course played. And given that the weather forecast looks pretty benign and similar to what we had for Thursday, I think we can take a lot of this and use it out there for our Friday exposure. So first off, if we split it by wave, you can see that the morning played slightly harder than the afternoon, which is exactly what we were expecting, right? The morning wind gusts were a little bit stronger than what they were calling for in the afternoon, and that coupled with the fact that it would warm up as the day went on, led to a pretty significant advantage. Now, it was only about, a 0.42 shot advantage. So it wasn't like it was a whole 0.75 or full shot advantage, but that adds up, especially if tomorrow the AM guys get the better end of the spectrum. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I don't see a huge edge out there for Friday, but even if it is just the 0.4 shot difference, it was worth locking in for some exposure, right? It's not like I went out there and was only playing PM AM guys, but it helped me get to some of these PM poppers. For example, like a Justin Thomas, who I wouldn't have played if it wasn't for the PM narrative. SunGM helped me get to even more exposure there, but especially guys like Colin Morikawa, who I was not thrilled about wanting to play this week. Because I saw that slate PM lean, I said, hey, why not take a shot on him as opposed to a few other guys in that 9K range? And it ended up paying off quite well. So like I said, a great start to the week, but we'll have to see how it shakes out for round 2. And speaking of, let's take a look at this weather forecast, which for round 2 looks pretty flat, all things considered. If we take a look at the wind gusts or the sustained winds, pretty much the entire window of play is going to be calm. It's sub 5-6 miles an hour of sustained winds, and then your wind gusts don't get above 10, maybe 11 miles an hour. And because they're finishing around 5 p.m. local time over there, maybe 6 p.m. local time at the very latest, you're not going to even get into this 9-10 mile an hour sustained zone. I mean, it's going to be pretty much calm the entire time. So whether you're a morning wave player tomorrow or a PM wave player, I think you're going to get some excellent scoring conditions. So though the PM wave saw the better side of the conditions today, I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case tomorrow. A lot of that was because of the difference in wind in the morning versus the afternoon. And I do think the temperatures were part of that difference, but I don't think it was a majority of that 0.42 shot difference. So that's what I'll say about the weather. If you had to break ties, I honestly wouldn't use weather to do so. This is much more of a slate where we lean into that game theory edge, try and get different with some of our exposure. And then after that, either look for some ball striking poppers or players that historically have a high ceiling in a single round of golf. So there are really those 3 categories of players that you can get to. It's either going to be a game theory pivot, a ball striking popper, or that third category, which is, kind of like an unknown category. It's just like high ceiling kind of guys. If you're not one of those 3 categories for round 2, I'm not playing you out there in my exposure, right? Normally we have that 4th category, which would be the weather edge to consider, but it's just those 3 this time around. So a little bit of a different slate. I do think that the scoring conditions are going to be pretty similar, all things considered, to round 1. So when we talk about props a little bit later, we go through some of these stat averages. We're going to be able to use them out there for round 2. They shouldn't move all that much from Thursday to Friday, which should make our prop analysis relatively easy to do. That being said, let's start it off with a look at the DFS side of things and what to do for Draftkings Showdown, which for rounds 2 and 3 Showdown is all about that game theory edge. Round 4 Showdown, we have placement points. It adds a little bit of an extra wrinkle there. But for rounds 2 and 3 is all about your pure scoring, right? There's no placement points, none of that nonsense in play for Friday and Saturday. So in our exposure, a lot of times we want to fade that chalk. And for rounds 2, 3, and especially round 4 Showdown, it's the top end of the leaderboard. Now, for Sunday Showdown, it kind of makes sense as those guys are starting with placement points or more placement points than the rest of the board. But for rounds 2 and 3, where that's not even in consideration, that's where you can find an edge out there for Friday and Saturday, or even for Thursday Showdown for that matter. Now, Thursday Showdown, there's no leaderboard to speak of, so it's not that same kind of effect, but especially out there for Friday and Saturday, it's why so many people find Showdown their most profitable kind of slate, right? Main slate can be tough for people. It seems like there's a lot of content out there, a lot of time that's spent out there for main slate every single week, but Showdown is where people get a little bit lazy. They don't spend all the same kind of hours that they do out there for their main slate lineups, and you can oftentimes take advantage of that. And really, the edge with Showdown is typically weather-based, and then the other aspect of that is fading the top end of the board. And while there are going to be some guys I'm taking that played well round 1, somebody like Aberg would be a great example of that. A Thomas Dietrich, who we're going to talk about a little bit later, is a more popular option than I'm taking in lineups. The far more interesting players, the ones that are actually going to win or lose you the GPP slate tomorrow, are going to be the guys that are getting you a little bit different. Those would include a guy like Tom Kim that kind of struggled for round 1. We're going to talk about Xander Schauffele here in a few minutes, who also kind of spun his wheels out there for today that you can get different with. And in a few cases, right, especially Xander, who we'll talk about here in 30 seconds, didn't even play all that poorly for round 1. So we'll catch up on chat. I want to see who's down there before we do this full deep dive. But we're going to go through a few players that I want to point out from the Showdown perspective. And then we'll also touch on any questions that you have. So I'm probably going to skip the questions for now. I just want to say hi to you guys down there. If there's anything super quick, I'll answer it. And then any actual player pool questions, I'm going to hold until I go through my highlighted plays, just because there's a good chance that you're asking about one of the highlighted plays. So I don't want to have to go out there and repeat myself if I don't have to. So where were we at? We got golf is on when you're awake now. Yeah, so you're up super early, Nick. Nick, by the way, is the earliest owl of earliest owls out there. My sleep schedule is completely fucked. So I'm going to be right there with you, man. I was up there at like 3 a.m. and that's going to continue for the next 2 weeks. What's going on, Barry? Great job on the props today. Stay hot. Absolutely. Cheers to that. What's going on? Go Pull It. What's going on, Antonio? And what's going on, Kep? You're looking at Decky or Willie Z. So I'm a little bit worried about those two players. So I'll say with Decky, he looked just completely out of sorts today. Now, could he bounce back tomorrow? Absolutely. Just an 18-hole sample size of golf. The one thing I'll say about Hideki is that he looked completely out of it. He didn't look like he cared out there in the back nine. That's kind of his MO anyways, so I wouldn't want to talk you off him all that much. Could they be a good bounce back? Definitely in both cases. Willie Z's form, though, is really sketchy. So Willie Z's form would be the problem. Decky's mindset would be the issue for me. But if you're willing to eat that at low ownership, you could certainly get a little bit different there. So yeah, definitely options that are going to be lower owned. I've got Hideki, for example, at sub 10%, and I've got Will Zalatoris at sub 4% ownership. So either option is going to get you plenty different to the other guys priced around them. And like I said, if you can stomach it, if that's the kind of player that you're willing to use, it is going to get you different to the field, if that's what you're looking for. All right, let's talk through some of our top plays. And then afterwards, like I said, we'll touch on any players you want me to do a deep dive on. So we'll start towards the top end of the board with Xander Schauffele, who gained in every category but off the tee today. Now, from fairway in, so approach play, around the green, and putting, nothing was over 1 shots gained per round. But if it weren't for the 2 shots gained that he lost off the tee, he probably would have shot something a lot more respectable. And given that somebody like Justin Thomas only hit 6 of his 14 fairways and still shot 8 under par and a 62, Xander Schauffele, a guy who's won at this venue before, I think is completely viable to bounce back. So a -1 performance, more spinning your wheels than struggling, are the kind of players that I really like for round 2. Somebody like Decky, I know we had a question about somebody like Willie Z bouncing back. They're just a little bit too sketchy for me. Now, I could mix them in if I really had to get different in lineups. I prefer the guys that play just slightly better than that maybe just had one thing go awry. So Xander Schauffele, the lowest owned player up top, partially because for some reason he's the highest owned, highest priced player, which doesn't make much sense given that he didn't play all that well. But at the same time, if we're going to get him at like half the ownership of Rory, I'd rather play Xander Schauffele out there at 11,700. And he's not quite half the ownership of somebody like a Ludwig Aubert, but still definitely lower owned than a lot of the guys up there in the 10K range. And I think has arguably the same, if not higher upside given his course history. We also got Aberg, who is a chalkier guy than I'm playing, but when he goes out there and he posts the kind of ball striking stats that we saw in round 1, and then on top of that got unlucky on quite a few scenarios. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you saw the video of him hitting the ball and then bouncing off the green, but on top of that, the guy couldn't make a putt. He was missing 5 and 6 footer after 5 and 6 footer, and while a lot of guys had that happen, I mean, Jordan Spieth comes to mind, guy could not buy a putt for his life. At the same time, Aubert's a solid putter. He's definitely a plus putter on the PGA Tour. Gains about a half a stroke putting per round. Goes out there, he ball strikes it like that, and then finds a little bit of magic with the flat stick. He doesn't shoot just -6. It might be that -8, -9 rounds. So I know -6 looks like he had that ceiling performance, but reality is, he has room for improvement, right? He had a few unlucky breaks. He wasn't making a lot of those makeable birdie putts, and gets to go out there early morning tomorrow and hopefully take it low once again. Tom Kim is the kind of player that actually didn't hit the ball well round 1, but what I'm doing with the Tom Kim, and there are actually a few guys that fit this description, they're the low-owned pivots that have played well at the golf course. So if you're going to take a shot on somebody that kind of, sucked round 1, right, -1, not all that bad. He did gain in every category but on approach. So though he did lose with the irons, he was at least solid elsewhere. At the same time, though, if I'm going to take a shot on a guy who didn't show it today, there's got to be a reason for it, right? They've either got to be that high upside player that long-term just randomly spikes, or a solid course history player, right, that actually has shown it at this track before. Tom Kim, of course, coming in with 2 top 10 finishes at the Renaissance Club, is certainly capable of posting a low score here. So $9,400, he was chalk hitting into the week. Now is much more reasonably owned for round 2 Showdown, all because he had, a slightly below average round, right? But lost 0.3 strokes to the field out there in the first round of action. Again, not all that bad in my opinion. Next up, we got Robert McIntyre there at -3. -3 was a decent score, right? Better than your average, but it wasn't the flashy -8, -7 that you had a JT or a Sanjay post. That combined with guys like Davis Thompson, Sahith Theegala, of course, right, one of our outrights for this week, going out there and having a solid day, are taking a lot of the ownership away from McIntyre, who low-key is playing some of the best golf of his life, came in second at this event last year, and hit the ball beautifully out there in round one. Gained in both ball striking categories, just really couldn't get enough putts to go in. And despite that, still played much better than your tour average. So given that his putting lately has been extremely consistent, he's been going out there gaining quite a few strokes on the greens. I think that for round two Showdown at a course that he's shown it at before, he's coming in as chalk this week, and now people want to throw him to the corner. Like, for sure, give me Robert McIntyre, right? I'd rather play him than a mega chalky JT or a mega chalky Sanjay. Both players, I think, are about the same caliber as what we have with McIntyre right now, right? Considering form, right? Long term, they're better players than McIntyre, but McIntyre hit the ball better today. And actually, I should take that back. That's not true. JT did hit the ball better, but he gained 3.5 strokes putting. Right? Do we expect JT to do that again? Probably not, right? He changed putters this week to go out there and try and change things up. I have a hard time believing that he just found a magic putter, a magic wand to go out there and make everything. So I love JT. He's one of my favorite players at tour. In fact, he's my second favorite player in the world behind Jordan Spieth. But at the same time, I'd much rather have the McIntyre who was doing it in the sustainable ball striking kind of fashion. Moving on past him, we've got ourselves Thomas Dietrich. He's kind of like Aubert. He was a guy I loved heading into the week. Of course, I bet him for an outright. And the reason why I'll play him despite the ownership in round two is the ball striking was immaculate. Gained about 3 strokes on approach. The kind of player that can go out there, repeat that ball striking, and it's why I played him heading into the week. The guy is starting to hit the ball a lot more consistently than what we saw before, and it's the course history here too. Top 10 a few years ago, had a second place finish at this event when Minwoo Lee ended up winning it. So when it was a DP World Tour event, he was popping off at the Renaissance Club, and obviously even as a PGA Tour event a few years ago, was able to do that as well. So another course history guy that was hitting the ball well, that unsurprisingly, I'm taking out there in my lineup. So, obviously I'm not going to show you guys every single player that I'm taking for all of my projections, my entire player pool, right? Check it out on the Patreon page. You guys know the deal at this stage if you've been around here for a while. But what I do want to show you guys with the highlighted plays that we're going through is the process, right? The kind of things I'm looking for in players to check off on whether I'm going to use them or not. Of course, right, I enter a bunch of lineups. Maybe you guys are entering just maybe 1 or 2 lineups out there. Even if you're just trying to go out there and build a few lineups, you shouldn't just blindly be clicking names, right? These are the kind of things I look for to build a player pool, but it's the same kind of thought process that you should be using to go out there and build a few lineups. We'll talk about ownership. We're going to talk about lineup construction here in a little bit when we actually build a lineup together. But in terms of looking for players, you shouldn't just be going like, oh, I think this guy's good. Like, oh, Rory McIlroy, he's great at golf. Let's play him. Like, have a reason for it, right? If it's course history, he won last year. Like, you could play him, like, if that's your reason, right? But like, have a substantiated reason for it. That's what we talk about when building a process, going out there and trying how to solve Showdown or solve PGA DFS. That's the more important aspect here. So I just want to point that out for anyone that's maybe new to the kind of things I just want you to take away from this live stream, if that makes sense. Moving down into this 7K range, first option I want to point out would be a Ryan Fox, who I've got relatively low owned. So I've got him projected for 5% projected ownership, and at $7,400, he's yet again another guy who's played pretty well at the Renaissance Club over the years, whether it was DP World Tour years or over the last 2 seasons. On top of that, though, hitting the ball well in approach, crusher off the tee, player that over the last month or so has been playing a lot better on the PGA Tour. So he's got the form, the course history, and you guessed it, he hit the ball well today. So if you're going to give me low ownership on that sort of player, I'll take him all day. And if you compare him to guys like an Alex Noren, he's lower owned just because of the scoreboard. He's lower owned than guys like a Novak, lower owned than guys like a Højgaard. And while I do have a soft spot for Højgaard, I'll just say that there's a good chance he's in my player pool. I'll say that much. And if you look at his shots gained approach, probably figure out why I have a soft spot for him out there tomorrow. Ryan Fox is lower owned than all those other players and is arguably the same play. He's got the same kind of form as these other guys. He's played at this course. He's shown it before. And round one, the ball striking stats are actually better for Ryan Fox than any of these other options, including a Noren, including a Højgaard, including Andrew Novak down here at -4. The guy who actually hit the ball the best today was Ryan Fox. So if you're giving me the lowest ownership, I will absolutely be a buyer there. Moving down a little bit further, Thorbjorn Olesen, also a player that has played well at the Renaissance Club over the years and also hit the ball well round one. Very sustainable kind of shots gained metric from Thorbjorn. And what I've noticed from him is that these European style golf courses and even the, PGA Tour events that kind of resemble these, European style golf courses, he plays so much better on. And just to give you guys some perspective, if you look at his season last year in the DP World Tour, he was waxing all the guys that are playing well, including Ryan Fox, including guys like Robert McIntyre for the matter. Last year, Olesen was the number one player on the DP World Tour. Now, there are a few of the guys like Rory went over there, ended up beating him in the playoffs. But in terms of guys that actually played their entire season on the DP World Tour, there was an argument to be made that Olesen was the best player last year. So now that we're getting him at next to no ownership, he's actually playing pretty decently and likes these European style golf courses. Give me some Olesen, right? Maybe it's the vibes getting back there with his DP World Tour buddies. I think he's due for a pretty solid week here. So a guy that fit the golf course, I kind of liked as a sleeper heading in. And now that he's 1.5% owned to hit the ball well today, count me in for round two. I also got my eye on Matt Wallace at $7,100. Another guy that I had my eye on heading into the week, and you guessed it. The approach stats looked excellent out there for today. So it's sub 5% ownership. I'll take him at the -2 score. And then for our 6K option, I think there's two. Let's see. Actually, yeah, two players that we're going to talk about down here. I'm not taking a lot of 6K players. Pricing out there for Showdown is usually relatively soft, so you don't have to force you down to this portion of the pricing unless you're really going aggressive up top. Unless you're forcing in two guys that are $9,500 and above, you're probably not going to have to take too many guys down here. Now, if I'm going down to the 6K range, I want players that have upside, right? So not just guys that hit the ball round one, hit the ball well, I should say, but also guys that have shown an ability to make a lot of birdies. And Alex Fitzpatrick would be that kind of guy. On the DP World Tour, has been a top 30 player over the last 4 or 5 months. And on top of that is a high birdie or better percentage sort of player. Is long off the tee, a really good putter. You've seen that when he's played the team event over there at the Zurich Classic with his brother Matt. And at $6,800, he hit the ball better than his brother. There have been events where he's beaten his brother out there on the DP World Tour, so don't sleep on this kid. So he's about 5% projected ownership. I played him in a few lineups out there for main slate, and for round two Showdown, given he was about a neutral with the flat stick today and gained a bunch of strokes on approach, I'll get right back to him at $6,800. Then the last play we're going to go through is a whole way down at $6,400. So if you really have to save salary, this is about as low on the board as I'd be willing to go. In fact, I believe he is the cheapest guy that I'm taking in my player pool. Marcel Siem is a pretty decent option if you're going to do so. If you're not familiar with the guy, first off, has some epic fist pumps. Guy is real easy to root for, but most importantly is a high birdie percentage player. Hyper aggressive, reminds me a lot of Siwoo Kim, both in the fact that he'll take aim at every single pin, and the guy is fiery as hell. If he misses a green, you're going to hear multiple F-bombs. He reminds me of Terrell Hatton in that way, but the aggressiveness is fantastic. He's one of the highest birdie percentage players on the DP World Tour. In fact, over the last few years, he's been top 5 in birdie or better percentage on the European Tour every single year. So he's not always the best player. In fact, he's very inconsistent. He reminds me a lot of Wyndham Clark in that way, where Wyndham, has a relatively low floor, but at the same time, he has a lot more birdie or better upside than his peers. So at $6,400, that's the exact kind of guy that I want to tail, right? Somebody that's capable of making birdies in bunches. And you guessed it. He gained strokes with the approach out there in round one. So give me 1.2% ownership on a guy that I know can fill it up with the birdies. Then count me in at $6,400. Again, you're not going crazy on him, right? You're not playing him in more than maybe 7 to 10% of lineups at the most out there with this sort of player. But if you need the salary up top, he is the kind of option that could get that done for you. So once again, those are all the highlighted plays for round two, but it's not so much the names that I wanted to bring your attention to. It's more so the kind of things I'm looking for in players. Without having a big weather edge to lean into, we have to be more selective with our player pool. We've got to find a way to parse through the options and find the best set of players for our selections. And in my opinion, there are a few ways to do so. Just to recap that. You're going to need some leverage. So for your leverage, you should be looking for some course history guys, right? Guys that can bounce back. Because in general, the guys that are going to be low owned to give you that leverage did not play well round one, right? So you're going to have to find a spot to get different. I think that's the best place to do so. If you're going to do something outside of course history, you look for pure upside, right? You look for guys that just make more birdies than their peers. If you can find course history plus upside, then that's where you find one of your better plays on the slate. Kind of like Marcel Siem that we just talked about, right? Outside of that, the other plays you should be getting to, if you're going to make conviction plays, course history, I think, is a decent way to go by that. But my main way, as you could tell, was ball striking stats. Are they doing it in a sustainable way round one where I could see them repeating that out there for Friday? If they luck sacked it with the putter, no thank you. If they lost strokes on approach and shot -5, no thank you. I just have a hard time thinking that they have a good chance to go out there and repeat that. So that's my round 2 showdown process. Hopefully it gives you guys a little bit of insight how to go out there and select the player pool. And now let's catch up on any of those last second questions. Let's see. Nakajima was hopeless, but Alex Fitzpatrick did okay. Yeah, I remember that, Jack. So Jack gave us a shout on those 2 players yesterday. Nakajima, I wouldn't beat yourself up about that one. He's a stud, and Jack, keep playing him, right? I mean, you've seen him on the DP World Tour. Kid's going to get it at some point. JT's putting could be okay, maybe not like today. Confidence matters. Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, anything's better than losing 2 strokes per round. So hopefully he can at least be a neutral, because I played him in a bunch of lineups this week. So I have to say, like, as somebody that has him in like 45% of my lineups, I would love for him to gain 3 strokes putting. But as one of the bigger Justin Thomas fans out there, it's just not going to happen. He's a head case with the flat stick, maybe one of the worst putters that we have in the world. So I would not count on that. Frank says it's interesting how, depending on the course history, a player's strengths and weaknesses, you're saying that all that factors in. Yeah, dude, golf's a crazy sport. And like, even if you look at all these factors, it only helps you so much, right? It's a crazy sport. You got so much chaos, volatility going on that sometimes we drive ourselves crazy. But hey, it's better to have a process, better to have things to look at than to walk around like a chicken with their head cut off, right? Just hoping to find the right plays. Got to have a thought process for it. So thank you. Tell me your thoughts. You're looking at Fox, Højgaard, and Xander to be at least par or better. Yeah, if you're talking like a 70 strokes line, I would absolutely expect those 3 to be under par. Fox, ball striking's there. Nikolai, same thing, right? Mentioned him. I have a soft spot for him tomorrow. And then Xander, great course history, right? One of your best players in the field. So yeah, maybe there's a little parlay that you're entering on a slate. I'm assuming that's why you're asking. That's not the worst option, especially with those low winds, receptive greens. I think you're going to see some solid scoring conditions. Now that we've gone through my player pool, I'm going to cap off the DFS section here with a little bit of lineup construction thoughts. So we talked about how I made my player pool, right? But after you get a player pool, you don't just have lineups, right? There's the other aspect of PGA DFS where you have to actually put your lineups together. And the key to this section, right? The key to knowing how to put together your lineup is knowing what you're building for, because depending on the contest that you're entering, your thought process is going to change quite a bit. Now, if you're somebody that's played PGA DFS for a while, you probably already know what I'm going to talk about here. But if you're relatively new, definitely listen up, because the next minute or so is going to be extremely valuable to you. Depending on the contest that you're entering, right, you have to think about your actual goal, because depending on the contest you're entering, you're going to have a different goal, right? For example, if you're entering the big lottery contest with like 30,000 other entries, do you realistically expect to win that with only entering 1-2 lineups? Probably not, right? I mean, realistically, you have a 2 over 30,000 chance of winning that contest. And let me just tell you, the odds aren't very good that you're going to go out there and do so. So if you're entering that kind of contest, your thought process should be go big, go home, right? You should be going out there to try and win first place, because the other aspect of that is, first off, you're playing against so many other people. The other aspect is that the actual payouts, the prize structure is so top heavy in those contests that finishing anything outside of the top 5 is really not going to get it done, at least for what you're hoping for in those kind of contests. So in those large field lotteries, your goal, your perspective is go big or go home. You've got to try and get different. You've got to try and beat 30,000 other people. So you've got to build a lineup built to do that, right? You're not going to take all guys that are 20% owned in that lineup, because even if your guy hits, 20% of 30,000 people are going to have them, right? 6, 7, 8,000 people are going to have that player, which is an issue if you're trying to beat that many people. The next thing, if you're entering a smaller field GPP, if you're entering like a single entry, like maybe $100 single entry with only like 200, 300 people, maybe you don't have to win that thing, right? Your thought process probably isn't go big or go home. In that kind of contest, you're okay with a min cash. Now, min cash is not the idea, right? That's not what you're going for, but you'd be okay with that. And more so, a top 5 finish in a single entry is going to pay pretty well, especially like a $50, $100 type of single entry. In that contest, you don't have to be as different. You don't have to try and go out there and take a pivot in 4 or 5 spots. Maybe you can afford to take a little bit more chalk. And then the other extreme, right? So we went from one extreme, which was large field GPP, to single entry in the middle. The other extreme on the other end of the GPP spectrum would be your cash lineups, right? Where you're only trying to beat 50% of the field to double your money, right? Because in those kind of contests, you don't even care about top 5, top 10. You don't care about finishing in first. Finishing in the 49th place out of 100 people is the same as finishing in first. So your thought process there completely switches, right? Because then you're like, okay, I just want to beat the guy next to me, right? If I can beat half the people in this room, well, I'm going to be cashing. Your thought process for each one of those lineups is unbelievably different. It's not even close what you're thinking through when building those lineups. So I guess just to give you a few pointers, right? Large field GPP, you get different, right? Go big, go home. The more towards cash that you get, the more chalk that you're willing to take. And on the other side, towards the cash spectrum, is where you're almost wanting to take all chalk. So hopefully that gives you an idea of lineup construction. And now let's build a lineup together. So for the big lottery, that's important to point out, right? This is going to be our thought process for building for like the big 30,000 entry lottery. If we're entering that kind of contest, you really want to try and leverage the field. So though I'll still play guys like Obear in those kind of lineups, he has less utility because he's going to be like 30% owned. Even if you loved a Morikawa, not Morikawa, I guess you could say Morikawa, he's pretty chalky, but I was going to say McIlroy over here at $11,600, he's going to be 30% owned out there for round 2 showdown. So it doesn't mean that you can't take those kinds of players. It just takes a little bit of utility away from them. Because if you use a chalky option like an Obear or a McIlroy up top, then you're going to have to force in a pivot with like 4 of your last 5 spots, or at least 3 of your last 5 spots, as opposed to maybe if you started with a Xander up top, well, maybe you only have to take like 2, maybe 3 pivots with the rest of your lineup, right? As opposed to going out there and taking 3 or 4 pivots. Every single decision has consequences. And like I said, it's not like you can't play chalk in these lineups. That's going to force your hand a little bit with your other spots. So just for the sake of this, we're going to start with Obear, right? We're going to start with a relatively chalky option up top, because if you're going to do so, if you're going to take a guy that's popular, I think you do it from $8,000 and up. And speaking of, there's a guy $8,000 I'm also going to throw into this lineup. That would be Thomas Dietrich at that price tag, because I'm just going to take my chalk right off the bat. I'm going to know where I'm taking stands, where I'm not really going to get different to the field. And then these last 4 spots, again, this is for that big lottery contest. We've got to get different, right? We've got to find a spot to get leverage to the field. So for our last 4 players, we're going to have to get sub 10% ownership. I'm going to force that into my lineups. And if I guess for our 1 AK player, maybe we can go slightly above 10%, but we're certainly not going to take a chalky JT who's going to be close to 20% ownership. So rather than him, maybe we go with a Robert McIntyre instead, right? Him at about 11, 12% ownership is going to give us slightly more leverage to the field. Our next man in, we go down here and we try and find some leverage. So Jordan Spieth, as ugly as a play as he is for the next day, he missed a ton of makeable putts. He actually hit the ball a lot better than his score. And on top of that, he's played pretty well at the Renaissance Club. So, you don't love Spieth. He's probably not the top of your list for your favorite round 2 showdown plays. But because we're in the large field GPP and we decided to take Obear and Dietrich up top, well, we kind of have to take Jordan Spieth, right? And if you get to this section of your lineup and you say, you know what, I just can't play Jordan. He sucks. Like, the guy's hurt. Like, I understand that, by the way. If you don't want to play him, that's perfectly reasonable to say for round 2 showdown. Well, then you've got to circle back a little bit, because in my opinion, outside of Spieth, Zane slow owned. I guess McKibben. I just don't like McKibben this week. I wouldn't play him, but like I guess you could take him at low ownership. But outside of that, there's not that many leverage options here. Like JT, Sanjay are mega chalky. Thompson, Thagala are like 15% themselves. Benny Ann's like 12, 13%. There's just, you don't really have many options to get different here. So if you're not willing to take a Spieth or a Bazainhout here, like you could take either one. Like maybe you don't like Spieth, you take Bazainhout, then circle back and take out another piece of chalk. So maybe rather than taking Obear up top, you go, you know what? Maybe I will just take Xander, right? It's going to force our hand with the salary a little bit, but it's also going to get us a little bit different. So now we don't have to force ourselves to take, an ugly play like Jordan Spieth. Now we can be a little bit more reasonable about it. maybe you go down here and you can still take a Benny Ann, who, by the way, was crushing the ball striking round 1. So I do think is maybe worth a look as some chalk. Now we're down to 69.5 remaining. We throw in Olesen at 7,200. So in this kind of lineup, we've got Dietrich, who's kind of chalky, right? I'm not saying that Xander's low owned by any means, right? He's like 20% himself. McIntyre's still over 10% ownership. Same thing with Benny Ann. But as long as our last man in here is, we'll say, sub 7% ownership, sub 5%, you'd be for sure be fine in that large field GBP. This has enough leverage. And we still have 4 players in this lineup, by the way, that are going to be like 10% or higher owned, right? Those 4 guys at the top. And this kind of lineup would still be fine in that 20, 30,000 entry kind of contest. So the point of showing you this is that you don't have to make lineups that are a pure leverage sub 10% guy at all 6 spots, but you do have to get a little bit different, right? You do have to consider lineup construction, make sure you're not getting too chalky out there for the large field GBP. So that's what I'll say. I know we went a little bit long-winded with the lineup construction stuff, but arguably probably the most important section of the video, and wanted to make sure to touch on that. Thoughts on Tommy Ladd for plus 220 for top 5. So if you're taking a top 5 right now, I don't think that's the worst odds, Antonio. Great course history too. So honestly, ball striking as well looks pretty spot on out there for Thursday. So I don't know about the number itself. I'd have to look at my actual simulation percentages and see like what I have them at for like a top 5 percentage. But I'm assuming plus 220 is comparable, at least based on my intuition. It seems like a decent number. But again, I don't know for certain. So I will add the asterisk there. And then you said thoughts on Tommy versus Hovland for round 2. Yeah, Tommy should be favored there, especially given his course history. One thing I will say though, Hovland does seem to be a little bit back. So I don't know if he'd be the right guy to kind of target. I like Tommy, but I kind of like Victor Hovland as well. So the way I would handle this, Antonio, is maybe line shop, see if you can find another matchup where they have somebody like Tommy versus somebody else, and go that direction. Like even if you have to eat like minus 140, minus 150 odds versus a lower tier opponent, that might be worth it in my opinion, because Victor does seem pretty spot on lately. Spieth needs to ask Ben Griffin about LASIK. Yeah, he does, doesn't he? He's the putter today was atrocious. I mean, I sweated him out for a prop and it was disgusting. Thoughts on McCarthy? Really rough day. So what we need to check on with McCarthy is how he ended up shooting well over par, right? Because you shoot over par with conditions like we had today and something went wrong, right? You can see he lost strokes with the putter, which I don't worry about. He's a world-class putter. He'll figure that out. What I do worry about is the losing 2.5 strokes on approach. So if you're in a big GBP, if you're in that big 30,000 entry contest and you have to get mega different, that's where you use a Denny McCarthy. Outside of that, I feel like you'd be doing too much if you play him in like a single entry, that kind of thing. It's just like an unnecessary risk, because if your objective is to try and find somebody that's low owned, you can find somebody that hit the ball just a little bit better in round 1. And that would be my recommendation, right? Obviously, he's capable of going off. It's just that there are options that you can find with that same kind of ownership that probably played just a little bit better. So yeah, I kind of unfortunate for Denny because I played a bunch in my main slate this week, but yeah, it was not a great round for him. What's going on, Omar? Great call on JT. Let's see if he keeps it up. Yeah, 3 more rounds to go. It'd be great if he could. What's going on? Antonio said, any hope for Seabez and Clark for a bounce back? Yeah, dude, it's a birdie fest. So as long as they're not well over par for sure, right? Clark's -2. It isn't Seabez like one under par or something like that. Definitely possible. What's going on, Phil? He said, you're doing good with your 1 entry. Hey, if you're a single entry, you've got a lot more balls than me. I used to be a single entry bro when I first started playing PGA DFS. The more lineups method gives you a little bit more sanity, right? Because obviously if you have one guy miss the cut, you're not going to be feeling that good over the weekend. So, hey, cheers to you. I could never do that. That's why I'm a 150 max bro. What's going on? Colin says the Patreon player pool was on point. Cheers to that. We got 3 more rounds left, so let's hope it keeps up, man. You got Fitz, Connors, Im, Rye, and Dietrich. So that's your lineup. I like the way you did that. Now, I wasn't a big Connors guy this week. Wasn't a big Rye guy either, but you've got some course history guys in there, right? Rye and Dietrich have all played really well here. Fitz, Connors, and Im, decent form too. So I kind of like that lineup. I'd go -4, Steven. So he asked what I think the cut line is going to be. I'd say -4. Appreciate that, camera bro. He said your breakdowns and explanations are spot on. Appreciate that, man. Yeah, dude, when I'm not doing a live stream at like 10 p.m., makes a big difference, dude. I'm not a huge like late night guy, and these live streams, I mean, it's great when they're in Europe because I can go, earlier for them, but when they're late at night, I'm cooked, man. Like it's been a long day. I've been drinking coffee all day, doing shit. It's greater to be able, it's better to be able to do this a little bit earlier. Alrighty, guys, that's all I've got for DFS, though. So if you're just here for that, smash the like button before you guys end up heading out of here. But a lot more prop stuff that we're going to talk through here. So if you have any DFS questions, you can still throw them down there in the live chat. But a majority of our focus from the maybe next half an hour here is going to be on props and that side of things. So we're going to go through some prop averages, what we saw for round one. We'll circle back to the weather for anyone that is just joining us to make sure we're all on the same page. Then we're going to go through the Underdog and Prize Picks boards a little bit. And yeah, we've got a few leans I was looking at on there, but we'll talk about those in a second. I've not entered any of these, by the way, so don't play them like you think they're plays. I was just thinking about them. Let's see, anything on Prize Picks? This is one I wanted to check. Nothing quite yet. So hopefully we can get those here soon. But let's talk through the averages first. So scoring averages in round one were easier than last year. And with the rain they got and the lack of wind, that was kind of expected. And considering that the wind forecast is nearly identical, pretty much non-existent, that is, out there for Friday, the course isn't going to be firm and fast yet, right? Only after just one day. You're going to see the same kind of scoring average, if not slightly easier. The reason why I say maybe slightly easier is, remember, in the morning, it played about like 0.4 shots harder because of the fact that there was some wind out there. Now the morning is going to be calm, right? So it might play a whole stroke and a half under par like you had in the afternoon. So if you saw the scoring average go from like minus 1.3 to minus 1.5 for round two, I wouldn't be all that surprised. And I did go through some of the pin locations. We're not going to do a full deep dive here just because it would take a little bit too long out here on the live stream. But I already went through them hole by hole, and they're actually about the same difficulty as round one, if not slightly easier in a few cases. And I guess just to point out a few, like hole 3 is a par 5, and it's pretty much a center pin location. Hole 1 is literally a center pin there in the back location. Hole 6, I know it looks like a harder pin to that short par 3, but that front little peninsula is actually the hardest pin location that you can have on hole number 6. And that's what they used for round number 1. So I know some people are probably like, oh, they see the scoring and they're going to try and change it. No, they're not. They know that this golf course without wind is going to be for the taking. I mean, look at the year Bernd Wiesberger won. It was won at 22 under par. Look at the year when Minwoo Lee went out there and won, right? He was out there making a shit ton of birdies. Like, they know that that's going to happen. They know it's unavoidable when you put PGA Tour players on a golf course that's going to have next to no wind. So this track is going to be completely taken apart. And just hole 10 to give you an idea, right? That's another par 5. It's at an easier pin location than what you had for round 1. Round 1, it was towards the middle right of the screen, and it was just over a really severe hump. So what you can't see from some of these overhead views are, of course, the slopes. Having seen this course the last 3 years, I have a really good memory. I'm not just saying that, I do. Like, I can remember the slopes on greens after seeing them just a few times. This front right has a massive little hill that like pushes things forward. Getting close to that pin location was almost impossible with your third shot. If you had to lay up, there was no way to get it close because your ball was landing on a downslope. This back pin location is going to give people that lay up a much better chance to get home in 2. Get home in 3, I should say, and get it close. And also for getting up and down, the miss on hole 10, because it's a 600-yard par 5, is to miss short right? If you're going for a 600-yard par 5 and 2, you have to hit a 3-wood, and you got to hit that thing damn hard to get up there in 2, right? And what happens, you golfers out there, if you try to hit a really hard 3-wood, you flail it out to the right? It happens all the time. Now, if you're lefty, you'd flail it out to the left, right? There's only a few of them in the field, so we don't worry about McIntyre. Out there at hole number 10, those righties are going to have a really simple up and down because they're going to have all this green to work with. Again, we're not going to go through every single pin location, but 16 as well. 16 is another reachable par 5. It is at an easier spot than what we had for round 1. So I already saw a few people on Twitter like that were just tweeting about the golf course saying like, oh, it's going to be harder. No, it's not. Like, look at the pins, actually look at the slopes. If anything, I actually think it's easier than what we had for round 1. So as you saw over here on Underdog, there were some unders I was looking at for strokes. In fact, if you take a look at the sportsbook odds, all 4 of these are some sort of value. Tom Kim was like minus 150 under. I think Matt Fitzpatrick was like minus 140. Xander was even like minus 130 odds. And I wasn't sure if Sanjay had a line, but he was priced around the same kind of guys that were like minus 130, minus 140 odds. So if we go over here and take a look at this, like look at this, right? Tom Kim is minus 150. Let's look at Fitzy on here. We'll just do this really quickly, right? Fitzy is like minus 140. Let's see, does Sanjay have a line? Let's see, where's he at? Yeah, so Sanjay has one up here and he's like minus 135 under. You're getting a little bit of sportsbook value, nothing crazy, right? It's not like they're a whole stroke off or anything like that, but you could get some slightly plus EV leans if you were looking at this board. Now, I was kind of hoping that Prize Picks would post something that we'd have that to compare to, which it looks like they haven't gone with that at this point. But these are probably be the main leans I'd be looking at. I did want a second look at the Xander line. That was minus 135 before. So yeah, it's still at that same sort of odds number. And let's take a look at FanDuel and whatnot too, because I had only had time to look at the DraftKings board before, and I am mighty fine curious on what we're going to get here. So Xander is minus 120 under there, so not as much juice. Let's see with Fitz. Maybe DraftKings is just getting some more early action, and that's why they have those. So yeah, slightly less juice on all of them, it looks like. So let's look at what we got to look at Sanjay, and then who was the other one? It was Sanjay and Tom Kim. So Sanjay is minus 120, and then I'm guessing Tom Kim's probably going to be like minus 130 over here. Yeah, there he is, minus 140 juice towards the under. So I guess the best play per the odds would probably be Tom Kim, but based on the pin locations and the low wins, it's kind of what I'm looking at are these kind of plays. Now, in order to pick our top options here, what I like to do on top of just looking at weather, looking at conditions, and then looking at sportsbook odds is taking a look at shots gained metrics, right? And seeing how these guys actually got the job done. And the reason why I didn't enter Tom Kim before we went live here is Tom Kim's stats today were not great. Just to give you guys that perspective, he lost 1.3 strokes on approach. He gained in the 2 short game categories, which have actually been really sketchy for him lately. So kind of unlike Tom Kim to be gaining in those 2 categories and then losing out there with the shots gained ball striking. Because if you've taken a look at his last 12 or his last 24 measured rounds, he's gaining like 1.5 strokes per round with the shots gained ball striking. So I don't love to see that he lost strokes round 1, but the reality is it was also only 18 holes, right? Like, so I don't know if we want to overreact all that much, especially since he just had a slightly below average round. So that minus 150 is probably something I'd be okay locking in. Let's look at these other 3. So Xander, I'll show you guys his shots gained metrics. His shots gained metrics were kind of strange. He gained in every category but off the tee and then lost 2 strokes off the tee. That feels like a spot that he could bounce back from. So I'm certainly okay with his prop there. Let's look at Fitzpatrick and then Sanjay as well. And I've already looked through these. The Fitzpatrick one, I can tell you the eye test, he looked like he hit it better than he did. So he gained about 3 strokes on approach there. That's fantastic stuff there. And the last one was Sanjay, right? Sanjay just gained a bunch putting and around the green. So the Sanjay stat profile is a little bit worrisome because he did gain 3.6 strokes on the greens. So if there was going to be anyone I took out of here, like maybe it would be Sanjay just because of that. So for the sake of this live stream, we're gonna go with this combination. So we're gonna take the under on Tom Kim and match him up with this under on Matt Fitzpatrick. 2 guys that are juiced towards the under. Again, Fitzpatrick, to give you that line on DraftKings, was I believe minus 140. So you're getting at least minus 140 juice on both players, which is kind of what we're looking for a plus EV lean. And then on top of that, guys that are hitting the ball well, right? Fitz gained a bunch of strokes on approach, and then Tom Kim, you know, the iron stats weren't great, but everything else was at least into the positive. So 2 guys that I'll lock in. And again, nothing posted on Prize Picks yet, but we can take a look at the Pick 6 board and then do it that way. And then maybe we'll have a Prize Picks board by then. But that's a long shot. We'll see. Where are we at? Did I talk about Rory? Very rusty, but started to cook. So if I am going to be honest, I'm a bad golf fan here. I didn't watch that much of Rory. The early coverage, I was watching some of the other featured groups, so I didn't get to see that much from him. But yeah, based on his shots gained metrics, he had a decent round, all things considered. He shot -5, so he's in that top 20, definitely in play. I thought that round 1 would probably be where we'd see some of that rust, especially given the emotional letdown of giving away that US Open. And on top of that, he's always a slow starter, right? Rory McIlroy a lot of times will have a slow start and then backdoor top 5, a top 10. He's gone off to the hot start this week. So I don't think he's a lock by any means. You know, we could see the emotional letdown come up at some point, but looked really good. You definitely, per the stats, looked good. Do I think Justin could stay under 67.5? Yeah, I think it's possible, especially because the conditions are easy. If this was a course where the scoring average was like closer to even par, I'd have a little bit more hesitancy about that. Right, going out there and repeating, gaining like 3-4 strokes to the field is going to be a little bit tougher to do. But the fact that he only has to shoot -3 to cover that, and that's going to be gaining like a stroke and a half to the field. Like I think the scoring average is going to be between like 1, maybe 1.5 under par. Gaining 1.5, 2 strokes to the field is not as much, right? It's gaining like 3 or 4 strokes to the field. So definitely possible. He is juiced under. So if you want to look at the sportsbook value, I'll show you that. He was -135 earlier. So let me see what he is now. So yeah, he's at actually -140 juice now. So yeah, kind of like the Fitzpatrick prop that we took. It's a pretty decent lean for sure. And in fact, that was actually one of the props that I was looking at before. And the shots gained metrics on JT are really good. So there's actually a chance I play him here on live stream. Look at this, right? Gained a bunch on approach. He did gain with the flat stick. Even if he is neutral with the putter, right? He still shot -4. So even if we expect him to not putt as well, which I think is very reasonable to say, like I doubt that he's going to gain over 3 strokes with the putter again. Even if he does so, that would have been a -4 round. Now he's still got to go out there and do his thing with the irons once again, but that is certainly in play. That's for damn sure. What else? You know, this course is easy to play, but isn't Spieth's strokes line at 67 kind of crazy? You hate betting overs, but that's too low. If you want to bet against the form, you can, but I'm a Spieth truther, so I definitely won't be tailing you there. All three of Tommy, Colin, and Aberg are at 66.5, and the unders are +110. Yeah, so the place to take them under is like on a sports book, because on a book like Underdog, for example, you're getting no extra juice. So they've got Aberg at 66.5. They've got guys like Xander. They had Rory before at 66.5 strokes. I would probably stay away from a lot of them, right? Xander was actually one that I was kind of looking at before, but on books, like if you can get the +110 odds or even +120 on a few, I wouldn't mind that, especially because the conditions are going to be conducive for that. All right, let's take a look at the pick 6 board, and maybe we'll get our wish out there with something on prize picks. So over here on the pick 6 side, let's look at birdies are better. So they've got guys like JT at 4.5. Oh boy, 4.5 birdies might be pretty nice. Let's see. So do we have anything posted here on FanDuel yet? So yeah, no birdies posted quite yet, but Caesars probably has us hooked up. So let's check over here. Let's see. So if we scroll down to where they have the birdie lines posted on Caesars, they've got Sanjay at 4.5, and he's -130 over. They've got JT at -140 towards the over. Who else do we have on here? So in terms of guys that we could take over here on pick 6, you have JT on the board. Let's see if Minwoo, obviously Sanjay would probably be a lean over. Sorry, not less. It would be over on these, by the way, not less. I have to say it. I like all of these over. Like all 5 of these over. Let's see. What do they have for strokes? Are they soft? Like, look, this makes no sense, by the way. They've got guys like JT at 2.5 under par, but 4.5 birdies. You know, they have the same kind of strokes lines as Underdog. That's why I say it makes no sense. But the birdie lines are significantly lower. Like, just for comparison, JT's at 4.5 with the 0.9x multiplier. Guys like Minwoo, I believe, are at 5 birdies already over here on Underdog. So actually, yeah, he's 4.5 up with the 0.9x multiplier. So if you're going to take like overs on birdies, the spot to do it is here in pick 6. And if I was going to pick my favorites, I would take GT out just because he's in first. I would take Sanjay out just because he had a ceiling performance. It's hard to back that up. That's the only reason I'm taking him out, by the way. But guys like Hovland, Minwoo, it would probably be my favorite, those two right there. The issue is you can't take that as a combination because you need an over and an under, right, to make a slip work. So if you're going to go ahead and try and like pick a slip here, like maybe you throw in the GT under in strokes, or you throw in like a Fleetwood under 67.5. If I was going to pick one, my favorite would be this Fleetwood under 67.5 to make this a little 3-man slip there. So this is what I would go with on pick 6. These birdie lines, especially on like guys like a Hovland, you know, Minwoo Lee, they're going to be carrying some juice towards the over on books. And on, you know, sites like Underdog already have that 0.9x multiplier. So the spot to get some, you know, exposure is probably over here on a pick 6 site where you can get them without that kind of tag on it. Let's see if Prize Picks has posted anything. If not, we're going to hop on out of here. But of course, guys, for all the different prop exposure I'm getting to, make sure to check out my Patreon page. On there, I post all the different slips that I'm getting to. And of course, on the DFS tier, I post the spreadsheet that you guys see when we're talking about the Showdown stuff. So for all the different behind the scenes content that I'm getting to, all different exposure that I'm entering, make sure to check out that page. There's a link down below to that in the description of this live stream. It helps support the channel, right? Your boy with all the content, and gives you guys all of that for yourself. So yeah, nothing on Prize Picks unless maybe we sit around here for 30 seconds, but let's see. If there's no questions, we're hopping on out of here. Yep, no questions. All right, that's all we've got here for the live stream, guys. Appreciate your support here on the channel as per usual. If you haven't already smacked that like button, go ahead and do so, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. Rounds 3 and 4 will be doing the same exact thing, so make sure to stop on by for those out there for Saturday and Sunday, and let's finish this week strong.